Niigaan, listen, I've started to become a little concerned about an alarming trend in our podcast.
Alarming trend. What are we doing that's so alarming?
Well, as you know, we've now done about 24 podcasts so far. Good on us. And more than a few people have told me that we apparently never disagree about anything.
What? Never disagree. No, that's a problem?
It could be a problem. Disagreement means conflict. Conflict typically means bigger audience. I don't want us to start calling each other names or disparaging each other for no reason, but you have to admit we do agree on lots of stuff.
Okay, let me see this. I guess you're right. I mean, we agree that climate change is an existential threat.
Yep.
We agree that Premier Heather Stephenson hasn't done a great job since taking over for Brian Pallister.
Yep.
We agreed that the upcoming provincial election is going to be much closer than people think.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess we even agreed on raisins.
Yeah, we agreed. And, not knowing that this was like a huge controversy in the Indigenous community, but we agreed that raisins are good as long as they are Sultana raisins, but that California raisins are no good.
I have to tell you, I don't think being of a similar mind about pressing issues that is that bad. I mean, we bring both different perspectives even when we're agreeing.
I don't know. I'm not so sure. I think there's something to this agreeing too much. Too much agreement makes the podcast seem predictable, cuts down on the audience we might attract.
Okay, come on. I think you're exaggerating. Conflict for the sake of conflict isn't that big a draw. And besides...
Hey, Niigaan.
Yeah?
We're disagreeing. I mean, we're disagreeing about how important it is to disagree, but we are disagreeing nonetheless.
Ah, yes. The sweet sounds of discord. Now we're podcasting.
The Winnipeg Free Press proudly presents, in partnership with CJNU 93.7 FM, Niigaan and the Lone Ranger. Here are your hosts, Niigaan Sinclair and Dan the Lone Ranger Lett.
Hello, greetings, everybody. Bonjour, nice to see everyone. We're at another episode of the podcast, and it's great to see you, Dan, over there.
Yep, same city, but not the same room. We're getting dangerously, perilously close to actually being in the same room again, but this is, having you in the same city is exciting.
It's, I was away for a little bit again, but came back, and here we have, just a few weeks ago, we were dealing with the issues of LGBTQ, racism, homophobia in Brandon. And now here we are here in Winnipeg with Louis Riel School Division, a school trustee, posting terrible things about more and more homophobia, racism that's going on within the city. This is kind of a rise of a certain political dynamic within the school trustees or within school districts throughout the province. But it's also, I think, a sign of things beginning to change when those who are feeling most privileged are starting to kick and scream about change. And so that's interesting.
Yeah, no, I think it is interesting. I mean, listen, the big dilemma that we face in news media is like, how much oxygen do we blow into these stories? And, I think if you were to add up the audience that doesn't care with the audience that feels like they've heard too much, then it's tough. But I do kind of feel that, in instances where I believe a public institution or body is involved and they should do something about it. So quick bit of background, a trustee from the Louis Riel School Division, a woman named Francine Champagne, she basically posted a bunch of really offensive stuff on her Facebook page that, as seems to be too often the case, attacked LGBTQ plus people, the community, and the worst part, like, spread all kinds of like noxious, stupid, conspiracy theories. And so she did it, and it kind of lingered, for a couple of days. And then thankfully, the Board of Trustees got together and they voted to suspend her for 3 months. Now, she hasn't said anything to anybody about this, but I did mark the occasion of this suspension with yeah, of course, that's the right thing to do. You got to send a message.
And they really didn't. I mean,
yeah,
the trustees in some cases could have done nothing, as you pointed out in your column.
Yeah, well, because we're surrounded by examples of people doing nothing. The Brandon Library Board entertained some very, very abusive and toxic presentations about materials that they felt were unsuitable for being in the library. Like the presentations were completely beyond the pale. The board didn't do anything to curb the person making the presentations, and a couple of the members of the library board applauded this woman and her awful conspiracy theories. I also referenced, and nothing ever happened. The woman who made the presentation seems to have just like evaporated, which I think is a good thing. But I also referenced from a completely different world the situation with the Toronto Blue Jays and one of their relief pitchers, a very fair to middling relief pitcher, who again posted some really awful stuff to his Instagram page, and he made a very qualified apology. And then later on, when he finally answered questions, sorry, I'm laughing because this is, if you were wondering at home, this is career suicide 101. So he met with journalists and he said, yeah, it was wrong for me to post it. I mean, it is totally in keeping with my personal beliefs. But, the lesson I've learned is...
I'm sorry that my personal beliefs offended anyone. And I think what the Toronto Blue Jays did, instead of outright releasing this rather nominal player, sent him to the minors as if that's punishment. I mean, the guy still makes millions of dollars and even hundreds of thousands. I don't know what they make in the minor leagues, but I can tell you that the guy's still getting paid to play a game and is still permitted to put on a uniform affiliated with the club and make a career out of this. I mean, I hope that the NHL and other organizations, businesses, private, public, they take note that simply by demoting people or simply putting them to the side is not dealing with the issue. Mm-hmm. Like not allowing NHL players to participate in a warm-up where jerseys that the team is trying to promote inclusivity does not deal with the issue. What you do is you simply put it to the side and you actually tolerate it. You hold it up and you recognize it as being, when somebody's allowed to not participate, you're simply saying that they're unique and that they're allowed to say what they wish and that your club are affirming that. So,
yeah, I think the thing that's surprising, and I will little shout out someone who I'm sure listens to the podcast, Globe Mail sports columnist Kath L. Kelly, who I think might be the best pure sports columnist in the country. I really love his stuff. But anyways, he made the point that this guy, Anthony Bass of the Toronto Blue Jays, when he did what he did, and he did it in the week leading up to in Toronto, where Pride is a huge economic and political force in that city. They tolerated it, and then they finally designated him for assignment, and they claimed it was a baseball decision. It wasn't about this as a thing. But Kath L. Kelly said, like, this guy's like a schmo, right? Like, he's not a very good baseball player. He's not making big money. Like, keeping him and suffering the negative publicity is more work than getting rid of him. Like, what are you doing? And I think that's it's sort of gotten to the point where, like, NHL teams that fail to discipline their players that bypassed, Pride activities, like, are they really that important to your team that you want to suffer, the condemnation of, because more people support Pride than don't support it. Way more people support Pride. So,
I also think it's moderately offensive in the dialogue that I read throughout the country around people talking about this as a nominal player and so forth. Somehow dealing with that. Imagine if this was like a major force on the Blue Jays, or a major force, a big time sports, like a Wayne Gretzky who said something like this, then I think the industry would have to deal with it in a much more direct way. And perhaps we're going to see what the NHL will do things with the issue of Joel Quenneville and the ways in which sexual abuse is treated, and people who allow it to happen or participate in it or spread false views, as we see. This is certainly an ongoing story, and something that not only is dealt with in sports, but also in industry and certainly school trustees throughout the country. There's also something that's interesting that's happening in the city or in the province that we want to talk about, and we're going to call this our Butterflies and Mermen section of the podcast. First time ever. Maybe we'll revisit this again, but you have a really interesting story about butterflies in Assiniboine Park.
Well, I got to tell you, first off, the Assiniboine Park, the leaf, the biome, or the biodome, or whatever it is, it's a beaut. Like, architecturally, it's quite striking. I have zero interest in going to see this, honestly. And it's not that I've been to similar, I suppose, attractions other places in the world, but I just find that with all of the things that we could do, all the attractions that we could add to the city, building a building to contain an artificial environment while the outside environment suffers seems to me to be a little odd. So I wouldn't say happy, but I was intrigued, recently when federal inspectors at Canadian Food Inspection Agency shut down the biome, largely because some very exotic bugs, including butterflies, escaped their containment area and were threatening to escape the biome itself. And apparently these things, if they do escape, they could really dramatically affect the local, ecology. And I just thought, once again, proof when you try to play God.
I was going to make a colonization reference, but
you try to play God. You mess around with stuff you shouldn't mess around with, and the next thing you know, is this? This is the beginning of some Japanese, monster movie, right? That the butterflies escape the biome. They genetically mutate, and then they become 30-foot high giant, butterflies attacking Portage and Maine. And
this has spiraled very quickly, but it is true that in conservation, it is really oftentimes a life or death situation for species that are inherent to the area. I remember one time walking around the Forks when we were developing the South Point. It's now called Niigaan, but the area that is supposed to be indigenous over at the Forks there. And as we were doing the installations for the statues and for the lodge that we built there, I was working with a botanist, and this botanist, we were talking about the plants in the area, and he said, this area is about 90% invasive species. And so about 90% of the vegetation at what's now the Forks are species that were brought here from other places. And these are, oftentimes what we now know as grass or weeds or, and all the medicines that were in that area, there's not many of them left. And so replanting is actually a big sort of source of indigenization of the area.
Yeah.
This is, of course, the issue, I think, when we start to do these zoos or biodomes and we bring all of these things from the world, you have to take it very seriously.
Yeah. So this isn't the only example of a, what were you thinking moment? I don't know how else to describe this next story, but in your exhaustive, research and investigation of the indigenous social media,
or just my life, I just open it up.
Oh, okay, all right. But so you came across, I got to tell you, I didn't see this one coming. I'm not saying I do miss trends. I didn't think professional wrestling was coming back to be really big in the 90s, but it did. So I'm not like a soothsayer, but I didn't see this next story coming.
There is the most amazing trend, and I encourage anyone to go out there and, there's something interesting that happened during the pandemic. During the pandemic, all these First Nations set up check stops across the country. And what they did is they started to sort of speak to each other because no one could speak to one another during the pandemic. But what they did is these kind of flash mobs, or what they call dance-offs, right? And so people would challenge each other's check stop across the country, and there would be this huge explosion of flash mobs at check stops on First Nations across the country. You probably don't see it, but you can look it up if you want on places, social media and so on. But there is an interesting trend that happened this week, and I think partly because the North, there's two things that are happening in the North. One is the forest fire situation and the flooding, the kind of constant trauma that's happening within the North. But then the second is there is this need for the North to sort of engage and think about humor and how do we deal with issues of trauma. And so in almost dozens of First Nations this week, you'll see that men are dressing up like mermen and then putting pictures on social media. So just
setting themselves on rocks
as sort of sunbathing mermen, and then posting funny pictures. And and I don't feel that this is a stereotype. Indigenous men are not small men. They are rather, we are healthy men, bigger men, and
healthy is a good word. Yeah,
men with a fishtail, sunbathing on a rock, and then posting Poplar River First Nation, Peguis First Nation, Puckatawagan. It does a few things. One is it's very funny, and then second is it's really kind of playing with some of these fantasies I think people have of Indigenous life and then, on top of that, we also have mermaid clans that within our communities. These are traditional stories that we tell. So there's some interesting intersections that are happening. And this really brings to a conclusion our very first butterfly and merman section of the podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, me being me, the non-Indigenous guy, like I'm not going to say anything about the mermen. Except, no, I do want to say, like, you be you, brother. Like it's because the photos, like, so that, and people can derive what they want, but the photos are deliberately funny. I mean, they're hilarious, and it's just, I mean, maybe it's just like a whole new stream of drag. I don't know. But it's fascinating. Yeah. Which, and I think this is a great segue, or at least an interesting segue into our exclusive interview with Federal Immigration Minister Sean Fraser. I'm just imagining that all of Minister Fraser's staff that are listening to the podcast are going to go, yeah, you did mermen and homophobia and killer butterflies. That was your lead in to the exclusive interview. But actually, so Minister Fraser was in town making some announcements. He had a very busy week, made a lot of great announcements, which we talk about. And he's a very interesting guy. He's a young fella, but he's clearly deeply engaged with his portfolio. And I mean, in a way, immigration, and you'll see from some of the things he's doing, immigration really is it has a touch point in a lot of big social issues, a lot of explosives. So yeah. So we're very happy to have that conversation with Minister Fraser, which we should begin right now. Really pleased today to have Federal Immigration Minister Sean Fraser with us. And it should be noted that Minister Fraser has come to Winnipeg. That's a big thing for Winnipeggers when you come to see them face to face. And so welcome to Winnipeg, and thanks for doing the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. Looking forward to the conversation.
So first off, you are Federal Immigration Minister. You are also the MP for Central Nova in Nova Scotia, which is a riding with a deep conservative and progressive conservative lineage. Peter MacKay, Elmer MacKay, and Brian Mulrooney briefly before he, went and got his heels back in a Quebec riding. And so I guess the question everybody wants to know is like, what the hell happened?
You know what? It was, of course, 2015 was a unique election in Atlantic Canada as much as anywhere else. There was a huge appetite for change on the heels of the previous government's time in office. And the Prime Minister, of course, was presenting a very different vision for Canada that really spoke to people. But it's not as though there was some magic ingredient now over the last 3 election cycles. Politics is about understanding what people are concerned with in their own lives and offering them a vision that coincides with their hopes for a better future for themselves and their families. So when you're sitting at somebody's kitchen table, if you're going to be spouting about my party's so great for XYZ reasons and that's why you should support us, those reasons better be informed by what that person's thinking about.
Right.
And it turns out, like many communities across Canada, people are less concerned with who gives the spicier remark in the House of Commons and are more concerned with whether you get a plan to get them a doctor, whether their kids are going to find a job in their community, whether there's going to be a chance for their parents to age where their grandkids are going to live, whether we've got policies that will help protect the environment. And my sense is if we continue to focus on the things that matter to people, people will reward us with an opportunity to represent them in the House of Commons. There's no magic bullet.
No.
You talk to people and you take your direction from the people who send you to Ottawa. And the minute you forget that, they'll remind you in the next election cycle.
Okay, well, there's another election coming up pretty soon, so don't forget it. Not this. I mean, 3 in a row, so you can't forget. So, in the commission of your duties as Immigration Minister, though, is this just Winnipeg and then back to Ottawa? Are you barnstorming the country, making announcements? What's going on here?
I spent a lot of time on the road. This particular trip, we started Monday morning in Nova Scotia, in my home. I spent Monday through the day in the House of Commons in Ottawa. Got here yesterday evening. I'm here today and tomorrow. Tomorrow night it's Toronto. Then I'm there for a few days. Then back to Ottawa. Another stop in Toronto, and then home again. So
Wow.
that's pretty typical. You spend a lot of time on the road, and for any stint over a couple of weeks, you try to make sure you're not just in the biggest urban centers, but you're visiting communities across the country.
So here today, we'll touch briefly on, you did have an announcement today that actually, according to all reliable metrics, got some pretty good coverage. 13 countries will now, residents of those countries will now be allowed to travel to Canada without visas. So that's, I'm sure that it's been planned for a long time. It's the thing I was struck by is it's kind of at this time and with all the things that are going on, it kind of came a little left field for me. So what's the origin story of this and what is the Canadian government trying to communicate through this gesture?
So we've been working on this for a long time. This policy represents a really significant change from the ordinary way Canada has processed visas. And for those who aren't familiar with immigration policy, this is the way we give permission for people to come visit us in Canada. One of the things that a lot of people may not realize is most countries in the world, Canada included, up until now, have had a very heavily focused immigration policy around which country a traveler comes from, rather than information about the specific traveler. The decision that we made today, which builds upon a pilot that we launched in 2017 with Brazil, focuses more on the individual traveler. By dealing with trusted travelers who have a history of following the rules, passing the process to be approved for a visa, we're going to be able to do some pretty remarkable things. So this policy is not visa-free travel for every single person. It's for people who have held a Canadian visa in the past 10 years or who hold a current American visa. And we have a very similar security screening process with the Americans. In fact, we borrow their system for much of the security screening process. What this is going to do is transform a process that used to cost families hundreds of dollars, sometimes take them a few months, and instead allow them from their phones to pay $7 and be approved in a few minutes. When we did this with Brazil, we saw a 40% increase in tourism from the country. We saw families get to be with their loved ones in far larger numbers, more quickly than was possible before. And we also saw about 40% of the cases that were being processed at Sao Paulo didn't have to be processed anymore because people were actually being approved automatically through the digital system.
So that's easing the burden there.
And freeing up resources to process other visas more quickly as well. So from an internal governance point of view, from a family reunification point of view, or most importantly in this context, from an economic point of view, this is going to be a massive win, and it's going to set the stage for future countries to come on board as well. And even in the air travel sector, what we saw after we launched the program with Brazil was direct flights pop up coming to Canada, and more convenient routes in addition to the flights that weren't direct. Air Canada has already expressed enthusiasm about the announcement today, and I expect other airlines are going to be looking at opportunities to capitalize on big travel markets that will help drive the tourism economy in Canada at a time it's desperately needed, when so many operators were hamstrung by the pandemic, when all of their customers disappeared.
Right. So again, especially when I read the background about the pilot project with Brazil, I mean, it does make a lot of sense. Unfortunately, the immigration file is one of those files where it can be quiet for a very, very long time, and then all of a sudden it can somehow get dragged kicking and screaming into other debates, other political debates. So one of the other things you're working on, and this is something that's upcoming, is the government is taking steps, as I understand it, to partner or to work in concert with a trusted partner who is primarily, their objective is to help refugees fleeing countries because they're being persecuted for their sexual orientation. Now that is an announcement. It hasn't been made yet, but something we're going to discuss a little bit right now. That is something that could get dragged into, it could be collateral, not damage necessarily, but collaterally drawn into another debate. The country is transfixed right now with debates about gender and sexual orientation. First of all, why don't you tell me about the initiative, and then tell me whether or not you have any concerns about the mood of the country right now and how it might affect this.
Sure. I'll start with the policy, and then I'll give you my assessment of the political discussion that I expect will follow. And I'm optimistic in Canada that it will not be the same that it would be in many other parts of the world for very good reasons. So first, it's really important that we understand why Canada has a policy around accepting refugees. We want to do our part to help provide safe haven to some of the world's most vulnerable people. The reality is that I don't think Canadians appreciate what an outsized role Canada plays when it comes to resettling people permanently. But I also don't think we appreciate the challenging circumstances that we don't face that many other countries in the world deal with because of their geography. So, at risk of oversimplifying the challenge or the nature of that geographic question that I just described, we're surrounded by three oceans. And the United States is at our southern border, which is the biggest magnet for people in the world and has been for quite some time. Other countries in the world have millions of people who can walk across a border when they're fleeing vulnerable circumstances. My sense is the lottery we've won by geography in terms of our ability to manage the influx of people who come in by giving permission to those that we want to approve is something that begs of us a bigger contribution to items of humanitarian concern than other countries of the world who are forced to deal with it by circumstance. And through the pandemic, we really demonstrated how strong our refugee resettlement programs are. In 2020 and 2021, Canada resettled about 1/3 of the total that were resettled globally. Mm-hmm. These are gobsmacking numbers when you compare it to other countries in the world who agree notionally that resettling refugees is something that's important. Whether it's our response to Syria, to Afghanistan, more recently to Ukraine, my sense is Canadians are actually quite proud to be providing safe haven to those who were in need of protection. The second part of your question, which touched on the political conversation, is one that if it came down to this becoming a divisive social issue, my expectation is the vast majority of Canadians would recognize offering protection to those who are fleeing persecution as a result of their sexual orientation or gender identity is a good thing. But what I hope the focus remains upon is that when a person is vulnerable, regardless of the reason, when they're going to be persecuted, when they're going to face violence, oppression, torture, or death, there should be an opportunity for the world community to provide that protection. The alternative is to have people suffer greatly, or to have them go into an international refugee system which is overburdened, somewhat clumsy, and will result in the certain denial of political, economic, social, and cultural rights that I think most of us take for granted every day. That's not a good solution. So we're working with a partner organization to identify people from the community of those who are being persecuted on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity, to identify some of the people who are most vulnerable, particularly those who are vulnerable for their defense of human rights of others. This approach recognizes that a lot of people from this community are very reticent to even explain to governments why they're vulnerable, for fear they'll be persecuted by the person they report to. We're also dealing with a global resettlement infrastructure that's severely hamstrung following COVID-19. The UNHCR is a wonderful organization, but their ability to turn the switch off and back on, both during the pandemic and during the retreat by the United States during the Trump administration's time in office on supporting resettlement, has really hampered their ability to operate the way that they once did and hopefully will again. So this demands of me the ability to find partner organizations who can fill that gap.
Like the
Rainbow Railroad is a perfect example. And to bring them into the recipe of what it makes to have good immigration and refugee policy in Canada is going to have a very meaningful impact and provide protection to people who are fleeing horrific circumstances. I look at the law that the president of Uganda just signed into effect that could punish homosexuality by death. I don't think that's reasonable. And I think if we want to demonstrate we're a world leader on humanitarian issues, we got to put our money where our mouth is and work with people who have knowledge on the ground. And this is a great opportunity.
So this doesn't require... There are no amendments to legislation or anything that this is required. And as I understand it, the government, the Canadian government, already entertained refugee claims if the claimant was, being persecuted because of gender identity or sexual orientation. So, working with the Rainbow Railroad, what's the practical impact? Does it mean more people at greater access? Just explain how it's going to sort of result in sort of an impact on the number of people coming to Canada.
Sure. So it won't result in more people coming, but it will. That we can take a decision to do that separately. But it will result in more people from this particular community that come, and the decision on whether more people overall should be given protection is something that we bake into our annual immigration levels plan. So at risk of oversimplifying, there's two different ways a person can become a refugee that receives Canada's protection. You can show up here and make an asylum claim, or you can be referred into our programs, typically by an organization like the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. What we're doing is allocating some of the spaces that normally go to a large international partner who would refer people into our program to a domestic partner who has knowledge of people's vulnerable circumstances on the ground.
And their own network of connections.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where the strength of Rainbow Railroad exists. Their ability to be plugged into the community on the ground and understand who is vulnerable, who is facing persecution, who's at risk of death, is something that will be incredibly valuable in terms of not only identifying the vulnerable people, but identifying them quickly while there's still an opportunity to provide protection before some disastrous circumstance will arise. By working with domestic partners with local knowledge, our ability to operate more nimbly will allow us to get protection to the people who are most in need from a community that's been for too long ignored when it comes to refugee resettlement.
Now, I want to say I agree with your analysis that overall Canadians have given every indication on every other issue that would be connected to this, that they would be sympathetic and supportive. From a journalist perspective, that's not really the culture war that's being fought in Canada right now. Isn't really about divisive public opinion. It's about the volume of public opinion coming from what I've identified, and I think others have identified, as a vocal, angry, and somewhat toxic minority. I honestly, and your thoughts on this would be interesting, I can't see how this vocal and toxic minority won't latch on to this announcement. I want to know, like, if you do have some fears, though, that this initiative and this organization could end up becoming a chew toy for some very angry people right now.
Well, let's not pretend that the people who might be angry that gay people exist are not already acting in hateful ways. In Nova Scotia, a couple of weeks ago, we had incidents of pride flags being torn apart and thrown in public areas for people to see. The friends and family members I have who come from the queer community will give you as much time as you're willing to take to hear stories about instances of discrimination that they faced. The reality is we can't use anger about treating people equally as an excuse not to do the right thing. My sense is if our guiding star remains helping people who are vulnerable, over a long enough time horizon, people will come to understand that we've taken the right approach. If anything, I think we need to demonstrate that in response to the anger that already exists, that we're putting our arms around vulnerable Canadians and vulnerable people around the world who will one day be Canadians. So from my perspective, the debate exists in isolation, but we can't have the fear of a difficult public conversation with an angry minority who doesn't like people on the basis of their sexual orientation. We can't formulate public policy or choose not to move forward to accommodate groups who have those unfortunate views. By moving forward, by helping vulnerable people, in the face of, I'm sure, some criticism, I think we will demonstrate to the community who's impacted that they really do have neighbors who care about them, and I think every Canadian deserves to hear that.
Yeah, I'm not, perhaps it's the, you may know, working in Ottawa around the National Press Gallery, that journalists are often driven by the dark forces of mischief and other things, and not that I'm trying to downplay the implications of it, but I will tell you that when I first learned about what you guys are doing with the Rainbow Railroad, I am absolutely dying to see what the Conservative Party reaction is, if any. I think the smart money would say they might choose to die on other hills than this issue, but are you a little intrigued to see how the Conservatives respond to this?
It's a funny thing. I watch the politics of social issues closely, and I anticipate what opposition parties might do. When it comes to my own portfolio and decisions that I have the control over making, it's not something that informs me as much as it does when it's something that plays out in the national media headlines. From my perspective, the last thing on my mind is how the Conservatives will react to me welcoming people who are vulnerable because of their sexual orientation. At the same time, your question comes in the context of a press conference that Mr. Poilievre gave the other day where he indicated that he was supportive of Pride season, but refused to answer whether he would actually show up for a Pride parade. I'm somebody who, my first Pride parade, I think, was 2008 in Calgary. There was almost nobody there from the group that I was with, but the people who were with the other different groups were very, very happy to have had some inclusion in the community and to demonstrate that they belong there. I don't know why it's controversial to walk in a Pride parade. I feel like that ship has sailed 20 years ago in this country. But I'll leave it to Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives to figure out how they'll respond to this. But if the response is anything but support for the vulnerable who are seeking a better life in Canada, I'll be sorely disappointed. I do not intend to solicit a political fight over immigration or over inclusion. Should others decide that they want such a fight, they should be prepared to deal with the consequences, not from their opponents in Parliament, but from Canadians and communities.
So it is the thing about immigration, though, that it can be a volatile and unpredictable portfolio. I'm dating myself now, but I was, covering Parliament Hill back in the 90s when, I'll call it the head tax. I know there was a more eloquent name, but where the Liberal government of those days, really did, it had trouble straddling the different lines of public opinion on immigration. And I'm not, maybe you think I am exaggerating, but it is, I think we see all the time where, the issue of immigration, total numbers of people coming in, aspects of the program, drives strong and sometimes unpredictable emotions. Fair enough?
There's no question. But my sense is public opinion has shifted, and we should be wary that it can always shift back. But my sense is, compared to even the time when I was a kid, the debate around immigration seemingly was framed more as the need to be supportive for celebrating multiculturalism, to be welcoming towards people who were different, and it made us feel good that we were a welcoming country. Now, some of the people who may have even previously been opposed to immigration are starting to see the consequences of lacking ambition on immigration. The reality is Canada needs more people, certainly for social reasons, but for economic and demographic reasons. 50 years ago, there were 7 workers for every retired person in this country. Today, there's 3. My region in Atlantic Canada has a little more than 2. I come from a community where over the course of my life, I watched schools close because young families moved away from rural Nova Scotia, and the mental health unit at the largest hospital in my community closed when a psychiatrist moved for another community. The consequences of not embracing population growth are severe. They result in people not being able to find meaningful work and a reduction of public services. Canadians don't want that. We're also living at a time when we've got a significantly aging population. That's going to have both an impact on the level of services, particularly in health, that are required, but it's also going to pull people out of the workforce for the next number of years in enormous numbers. Employers are leading the charge, but you don't have to pore over the labor force statistics survey every month like I do to understand that we need workers in this country. Go down Main Street of virtually any community in Canada. Despite Canada having one of the strongest economic recoveries from COVID-19 of any advanced economy in the world, there's 700,000 jobs available right now that need to be filled, with all the training in the world, with all the policies to bring in marginalized groups to allow them fairer opportunities to participate in the economy, with whatever supports we can bring in to engage Indigenous communities, Black communities, newcomer communities, Canadians with disabilities. The people who are here now will not be able to fill the gaps in the short term, let alone the skills gap in the long term. So this is as much an economic issue as it is a social one. So
if I might, I think there's a really good example of, at least within the bubble that is Parliament Hill, about how immigration occasionally gets used as a bit of a volleyball. So, and you'll correct and refine my facts if I have it wrong, but there was a private member's bill proposed by a Conservative senator that has received some support from NDP and Liberal members that would really remove some of the silly and arbitrary rules that prevent the children of Canadians who are born abroad from achieving full citizenship. And it is, I think if you explain the issue, a lot of people would be shocked that this is even an issue. So the Conservative senator proposed it. It received some all-party support. And then suddenly now the Conservatives are filibustering the private member's bill at committee to stop it coming forward. I'm not saying this is the perfect example of how immigration gets bent into whatever shape somebody wants it, within that bubble in Parliament Hill, but it's a little perverse actually what's going on.
Yeah, so let me first address maybe what's happening from a factual point of view, and then give my sense of what we're dealing with in terms of the politics, because I think it's unclear to me what's motivating the Conservative position right now. So it's Bill S-245 for those who want to dig in and learn a little bit more, but it deals with an issue that is colloquially known as lost Canadians. So there's different cohorts of people in this country that either had citizenship and lost it, or ought to have had citizenship and weren't given an opportunity. And the bill, in my view, was motivated, this is Conservative Senator Yona Martin's bill, but by very good intentions that wanted to solve certain problems that I also am interested in solving. It was unique to see Liberal and NDP members come together to agree with the principles that Senator Martin had been trying to move forward with, but then add to the bill to solve additional problems. One of those unique problems is referred to as the first generation limit, or the second generation born abroad. This manifests itself in very weird ways. So I know people from my community at home, and I've met people from across Canada who were born to Canadian parents, moved to the United States when they were an infant, and returned to Canada when they were one, who then grew up in Canada, cheer for their favorite hockey team, whether it's the Leafs or the Habs. They go to Tim Hortons when they can. They're every bit as Canadian.
Cheer for the Habs in Atlantic Canada?
Yeah, that's right. I'm a Habs fan since I could walk, so it's...
okay. I think maybe we're going to have to rethink the whole interview. Okay, let's just keep going.
That's right.
We'll just keep going.
No doubt there's somebody in Winnipeg who cheers for the Jets here. In this set of circumstances. But the reality is these are people who are Canadian, who grew up Canadian, were born to Canadian parents, who were raised in Canada. If they, as an adult, move to the United States to study, temporarily even, and they have a child, that child does not benefit from citizenship. There's actually members of parliament. There's one I'm thinking of now in another party, and I don't want to signal who it is because I don't know how comfortable they are being identified. One of their children was born earlier than expected while he was traveling for a couple of weeks, born in the United States. That child cannot pass on citizenship to one of their children should their child be born outside of Canada. Despite the fact that they will be raised in Canada, they will grow up and become an adult in Canada. And solving this problem, I think, is very important to do. And the committee members have found a unique way to move forward with this reform by aligning the residency requirement with what we require of permanent residents who move to this country to become citizens. I'm not sure. So that's what's going on.
Right.
In terms of your question on this being a political football or volleyball, I think, as you described it, it's unclear to me what the motivation is. I don't know that this is a principled opposition to having more inclusive citizenship policies, or if it's merely the end of the parliamentary session and trying to interfere with the government getting things done. That'd be a great question for some of the Conservative members on the committee.
Well, so a few hours before we were able to sit down and talk, one of the members of the committee, Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner, who's well known to people in Manitoba as a native, once a Manitoban elected official. She basically, her quote was, "These are substantive amendments which materially affect the Citizenship Act, so they deserve scrutiny, and we are scrutinizing them." So the concern she's identified is they believe the Citizenship Act is undergoing major changes, and I suppose implying that there's kind of a backdoor attempt to do that. Is that do you think that's politics?
Look, first of all, Michelle is somebody I've got respect for. I like her personally. We get on well, and we've worked actually very well together on a few instances recently. And so, Michelle, if you're listening, hello. Good to chat.
Yeah, I really want Michelle to listen, so maybe we'll have to send a note through and say that we've been talking about you. You should listen.
And I'm happy to have this conversation with her and others in the House of Commons as well. There are serious changes to the Citizenship Act that are being proposed as a result of the amendments that have been put forward by committee members. But I sense that there is more than the usual scrutiny applied to bills. When I see people who tend to talk out the clock, who go far beyond the normal number of meetings that would be required to even assess full-scale reforms through government legislation. It seems as though there is an effort to ensure the reforms don't pass because they realize that they don't have the numbers on the committee, so they'll implement delay to prevent the committee from getting anything done. My sense is that filibusters might be appropriate if you're trying to call into question some abusive process by the government of the day. But when it comes to an objection on the substance, ask your questions, allow the witnesses to give testimony, and then vote the way your conscience demands, but live with the results, because no one party is entitled to commandeer the House of Commons or its committees. And my sense is we would be better served if we gave the opportunity for the process to play out and have members register their substantive concerns and hopefully improve the bill. At the end of the day, that's what the committee process is designed for, and I think we've got an opportunity to make serious improvements to this bill.
Well, I have a brother who has one of his children was born in Atlanta while he was working there. And for the sake of her and for her children, if she decides to do that, I really hope someone I'm going to say it because I know Adam bleeps it out. So I hope they get their shit together. Maybe we can let that one go through because it's very important.
And it's relevant.
It's
and
relevant.
Timely.
It's a relevant shit. Yes, absolutely.
And I think I may have just met the Jets fan with that particular anecdote. So
yes, absolutely,
the prophecy has come true.
Again, there are so many. We were talking about this before we sat down for the recording part. There's like a gazillion issues. I mean, really, first of 3-part series with Immigration Minister Sean Fraser. But the one that really, you really lit up when I brought it up, the Globe and Mail wrote an editorial recently with what I thought was like a tremendously good suggestion. So that's why I'm mentioning them. They noted, and it's true, in a city like Winnipeg, we feel this. This is a story that arises almost every week. Canada is accepting more immigrants through all various streams than ever before. And we haven't reached 500,000, I believe, but 500,000 it's out there on the dashboard close. At the same time, though, the people that are working on resettlement and support, the biggest problem is that there's already a housing shortage in Canada, affordable housing shortage. It's extended to, obviously, to people coming in through immigration programs. So their suggestion is to marry the two initiatives, either an immigration stream of the housing program or a housing program stream of the immigration program. So the government is active on both files. Is there actually is that just the suggestion from an enthusiastic layperson, which is what journalists are, or is there something to that?
There is something to this. The reality is, we know that bringing in, I want to be careful. I should say welcoming 500,000 new permanent residents, it's by 2025, by the way,
yep.
Is something that will serve Canada's economic interest. But it's not enough to get people here. You have to make sure they're set up for success. Let's keep in mind as well that of the 500,000, when we get there, about half are people who are already here that came in as temporary residents, international students, workers, or people who maybe came to visit and are transitioning to a longer term status. I want to be really careful here, though, because the solution to our housing challenges cannot be perceived to be to shut the door on newcomers. And it's really important that we adopt smart immigration policies that are actually going to help alleviate some of the social pressures. I would add healthcare, by the way, to this conversation. But we do need to improve the way with which we build out the absorptive capacity of communities in healthcare, in housing, and frankly, we need to better mirror our immigration policies to the industrial strategy for Canada to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success over the course of generations. So there's some things that we've done, and I'll signal where I hope we're going to go. Some of the things that we're doing to encourage people to come to parts of the country that have greater capacity include regional immigration programs. We've significantly increased the provincial nominee program allocations, so provinces can decide who's coming and in which communities they're going to live. We've increased the numbers for the Atlantic immigration program significantly. And as an Atlantic Canadian, it's unique for us to be feeling housing pressures because that's not been our experience outside of Halifax, more or less, right. Though it's getting there. We've got the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program that we hope to extend and improve upon that will encourage more people to go to communities that have capacity. But one of the unique aspects of immigration is that if we bring the people in with the skills that are necessary to build houses, to work in healthcare, or to work in strategic growth opportunities in key sectors, we can actually have more people alleviate some of these social pressures rather than exacerbate them. We made an announcement just a few days ago about new targeted immigration draws that will be focused on the sector that a person works in. Rather than just taking the highest scoring applicant, we're going to take the highest scoring applicant in the sectors that are in the greatest demand. There's 5 categories: healthcare, tech, transportation, agriculture, and the skilled trades. Right. The purpose of including the skilled trades is to make sure we're bringing in more people to build houses. When we talk to developers, once they get their municipal zoning approvals, and zoning issues taken care of, the biggest issue that they run into is not having the labor and talent that they need to actually go complete the projects that they know they have demand for. By actually bringing folks in who have the skills we need, we can build more houses more quickly. Of course, this creates a circular conversation about where are they going to live when they come here. But on balance, a home builder is going to build more homes than they take up over the course of their time in Canada.
No, for sure. I think the Globe wasn't certainly the first to make this observation, although it was built into their editorial, and we've written a lot about it recently in terms of efforts to redevelop the downtown. But this is because this is now where immigration slides into the affordable housing debate. So it's not about the skilled trades. That's great. It makes perfect sense. But skilled trades who are building homes in sprawling suburbs, as in the creep of large urban centers, is not really addressing the affordable housing crisis. Density, true either not-for-profit or mixed income, mixed market, that kind of thing. And so all of a sudden you realize the provinces will have a role, but really this puts federal government right in touch with local government. Bylaw changes, the ability to put more high-density housing into older neighborhoods, everything. I'm assuming that dialogue connecting immigration and housing with local government is maybe, if it exists, it's at a very early stage.
It is at an early stage, and admittedly, there is more that we need to do on this conversation. We've just completed the consultation process for a strategic review of Canada's immigration policies, and one of the major recommendations that will come out of it, at risk of scooping my own report, will be that we need to better marry the absorptive capacity of communities with the number of people that we're welcoming. What we see when we have community-driven programs like the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot is that people arrive not only with a better opportunity to find homes, but with a community that's very supportive of them, that sets them up for success. My vision for the longer term is that a series of different cabinet ministers should actually be signing off on the federal immigration levels plan. The idea that the housing minister, the infrastructure minister, the health minister don't have feedback into this conversation. They have many thoughts. We have informal conversations. Sure. But from a governance structures point of view, it would be so much stronger if those concerns were formally baked into the process. My sense is this is the next chapter in terms of how we develop immigration programs to make sure that we're doing it in a way that recognizes immigration is not just about the people who arrive here, but the communities that they live in, that they work in. And if we can adapt the mindset that we should be adopting policies across ministries when it comes to population growth strategies, both the newcomers who arrive and the Canadians who've been here for generations would be better served. So yes, it includes being plugged more closely into municipal decision-making with programs we develop in the housing ministry. The same way it's going to require us to engage with provinces and deal with health transfers in the health ministry. the same way it's going to, years from now, require us to be properly funding municipalities to plan their water and wastewater infrastructure, decide where the ball field's going to go, make decisions about where the next hospital is going to go in a particular community. These are questions that are the source of really engaging conversations right now, and represent the next frontier on not just immigration policy, but population growth policy in Canada.
It's always fascinating to me when somebody proposes, as you have and others have, we ought to have a single table where all of the relevant portfolios are there interacting together. And of course, to the uninitiated, the question is like, whoa, wait a minute. There isn't a formal process but of course, and that's not a criticism, but that is an excellent exploration of what government is about, and how the silos don't always cross-pollinate. And so, honestly, it's not just that I wish you good luck with it. I think you've enunciated the problem. Well, I think everybody who's interested in this would like to think we're moving to an evolved approach.
Yeah, look, that's right. And make no mistake, we have conversations now between ministries, both ministerial colleagues talking to one another, officials talking to one another. But I've seen when you develop a formal process that brings together not just ministers who are excited to chat on the phone about a new idea they have, but people who are doing the deep dive policy work, people who know the individuals who head up settlement agencies across this country, people who understand that there's certain municipalities that don't have the ability to build out more wastewater infrastructure that will allow for population growth because of the geography or geology in that community. There's a number of different factors that lead to fantastic conversations if you get the process right. And part of getting the process right is going to say, here's my suggested policy. Before we pitch this to our cabinet colleagues and adopt it as the official government of Canada approach to immigration, I want the housing minister to have his eyes on this. I want the infrastructure minister to formally sign off. I want the health minister to understand more specifically how our policies will help bring the workers in that he needs, rather than simply being worried about more people to serve with existing resources. When you force these conversations into the formal process, it leads to better and more thoughtful decisions, and that's going to be part of the next step in this conversation.
So at the Niigaan and the Lone Ranger podcast, I always try to say it once so people still, understand. We're still using that silly name. We didn't have a strict policy against it, but I will say that it's been such a great conversation that I may actually ask other Montreal Canadiens fans on the podcast. I don't want to jump to any conclusions right now because I'm going to have to kind of see how I feel about this tomorrow, but...
The thing is, dear listener, you might think that Dan is being facetious, but I'm looking at his face right now, and I'm seriously thinking that he's dead serious.
Yeah, you just, the problem is you go into a podcast, you never think you're going to talk to a Habs fan, and then there he is right in front of you, and...
That's right. Geez. Well, look, I come by it honestly. When I was a kid, I collected hockey cards like so many of us did. And my dad was a Habs fan, and he bought me a pack of hockey cards. And Russ Courtnall was in one of the first packs I ever opened when he played for the Habs. And his birthday is June 1st, which happens to be my birthday. So he became my favorite hockey player for that reason. And
even after he moved on?
Yeah. Well, no. Look, my affiliation very quickly moved to Patrick Waugh.
Oh, okay.
I still remember the 10 overtime wins en route to the '93 Stanley Cup. The last time.
Okay, well, so switching topics right now.
Just to remind everyone, other good sports are, of course, available.
Yes, other good sports are available. Mr. Fraser, thanks for coming to Winnipeg to do some business. Thanks for sitting down and talking with us. Lots of worthy work going on. We wish you the best of luck. And it doesn't sound like you're going to get much of a summer holiday, but hey, you gotta strike while the iron is hot. So we appreciate your time and your effort.
Well, thanks very much. And the good news is, on summer holidays, I live in Nova Scotia, just a few minutes away from the Northumberland Strait, which is the warmest ocean water in Canada. So when I'm home, I've got a 7-year-old and a little guy who's about to turn 2, and we'll steal a few days at the beach in between meetings.
So we are thanking you again and not shedding a tear for you this summer. Sean Fraser, thanks very much.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
What a great interview with the Honorable Sean Fraser, the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, comes from Nova Scotia. I mean, interesting, a couple things from the takeaways from the interview is one is he's really part of this younger brand within the Liberal Party. And I think someone to watch for going forward in the future. There is real strength of the Liberal Party out east. We don't often see that on the prairies, especially since we're surrounded by a lot of sort of anti-liberal forces, particularly coming out of Alberta and Saskatchewan. But then the second is that, we're really impacted by immigration here in Manitoba. A lot of Ukrainians are being sent here. And of course, previously the Syrian population. It's very interesting that you talked a lot about the Rainbow Railroad because as we started the podcast today, we were talking about issues in the community or in Manitoba around anti-LGBTQ sentiment in the province, and that we're openly advocating in the federal government for people to come to the country who are being persecuted for their sexuality.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting discussion with the minister, particularly about the fact that this initiative is happening now when, quite frankly, there are the People's Party of Canada and various other extreme elements they're mimicking the attack on gender identity, sexual orientation. That's really a huge issue in the United States. We have our mimics here that are trying to create a similar culture war. And, into this, like the federal government is announcing, a partnership with the Rainbow Railroad to better identify people who need refugee protection because of sexual orientation. And I do not, this next comment, I don't mean to say that I doubt the sincerity of what the government is doing, but there are some political benefits to what they're doing as well, because quite frankly, this is a file that the Conservatives, they have no cachet on. They don't know what to say. And, are they going to criticize it? Are they going to, use some dog whistle terms? Are they just going to ignore it because they realize? So, I think there is some smart tactical politics. Yeah.
I mean, there's a by-election in Manitoba happening in 7 days. One of the wedge issues between the People's Party of Canada, who doesn't really have a big foothold, but interestingly enough, are running the leader here in Manitoba and Portage Lisgar. One of the wedge issues between that element of the party or that element of the political side we'll call the right, and then the Conservative Party is this issue around LGBTQ, and then all the other kind of issues that relate with that, with gender and sexuality. And so that's interesting that the Liberals are putting a lot of attention into that issue, because what it does is it presents the opposition with a difficult decision of how do they intervene if they do at all.
Yeah, I mean, it should be said that, the Conservatives have, in the past, they've actually expressed support for refugee determination based on sexual orientation. This will certainly put to a test their commitment, because, with what's happening in Uganda and Russia and other even the United States, for goodness sakes, it is unsafe in an increasing number of places to be a member of the LGBTQ community openly. In terms of the trends that I've missed, that's the one, the backsliding that we've done in recent years. I didn't see that one coming. I thought we were making progress towards the protection of people on this basis, but I am sad to be wrong. I hate being wrong at the best of times, but I'm sad to be wrong on this one. So
sometimes you can get into islands, and I think it's important to, in that interview that Sean Fraser reminded us that in areas of the world, there is still such great violence against people who are historically been disenfranchised in the past, either race, sexuality, and that's still going on today and even in many cases getting more violent than ever.
We may disagree about so many things, Niigaan. We disagree about so many things.
We have to work on our disagreement.
But on this, we agree. Yes, on this we agree.
Well, I guess we both have to agree that yet another great interview that you did, and also that the end pretty soon of our summer programming. We're going to do a few more episodes here before we take the summer off. And but thanks to everybody for supporting the podcast, everyone who's listening out there. Thanks to everybody at the Free Press. Editor Paul Simin and Wendy Sawatsky, who does all the tech to upload, and of course our great friends at CJNU, Adam, our producer Adam, and all the great people who support. CJNU's been very busy with their programming, getting themselves ready for taking some time off in the summer, so doing a lot of heavy lifting, and so fitting us in, doing the editing has been a great appreciation of ours that they're doing that. And at the same time, a big thanks to you, Dan, yet again, for organizing a great interview and delivering that as I've been dealing with some family issues and traveling. And let's hope that this week, I will just sort of tip my hat that there is a very special interview we're doing this week, and we'll be doing it together. So that's great.
Yeah, like, oh my God. I actually have to figure out if I can process. Like I've had honestly, like based on what you and I do for a living, being able to do the interview on your own is pure pleasure. It's a luxury. What? I have to share the questions now? Oh my God. Oh well. We'll
next week's episode, I think, will be very interesting for many of our listeners, and for particularly, watch for the by-election this week. I think there's interesting trends in Manitoba politics that isn't quite happening elsewhere in the prairies. And so watch for this week. I'm very interested to see what the by-election will look like on the 19th.
Yes. Just a sec. Double check.
It's June 19th is the election, the by-election.
Yep, you're right.
I can't believe you doubted me.
Anyways, that should wrap up the episode.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody.
Bye.